The chains announced him before his face did. Metal links dragging across marble, slow and deliberate, the kind of sound that makes a courtroom forget how to breathe. The double doors swung open, and Axel Strickland walked in like a man who'd never once believed in mercy, judges, or second chances. He stood 6'3", with shoulders like a freight engine, and ink crawling up both arms in black, tangled vines. The leather vest hung open, cracked and faded. Death's Choir MC patched across the back in letters law enforcement knew across 4 states. His boots were still dusted with something. Road grit, maybe blood, hard to say. Even shackled at the wrists and ankles, he moved like a storm that had learned to walk upright. Then his eyes found Judge Frank Caprio. The room went still. What happened next wasn't rage, wasn't revenge. It was something no one in that Rhode Island courtroom expected, and it ended the entire case right there. Before we show you how it unfolded, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and make sure you subscribe to Order in the Court with that bell turned on, because today's story proves that sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one who refuses to break. It was Wednesday morning, 9:55, Providence Municipal Court. The kind of morning where coffee goes lukewarm on notepads and traffic tickets pile up like snow. Judge Caprio had been through 3 parking violations and a noise complaint when the air changed. That unnatural quiet before a storm, when even sound holds its breath. A deputy near the side door shifted his weight. The court stenographer, a woman who'd recorded everything from panhandlers to gang leaders, stopped typing mid-sentence. Then came the chains. Axel Strickland walked to the defendant's podium, flanked by 2 officers, one twice his age, the other half his size. When he stopped, his ankle shackle scraped tile. The courtroom didn't breathe. Judge Caprio adjusted his glasses, voice steady and formal, but not unfriendly. "You must be Mr. Strickland." Axel didn't answer, just stood there, jaw set, eyes scanning the room like he was daring someone, anyone, to meet his gaze. Nobody did. Caprio opened the manila folder in front of him. "Let the record reflect the defendant has arrived and is present. Charges include aggravated assault, resisting arrest, criminal damage to property, and reckless endangerment tied to an incident at Eddie's Bar on Atwells Avenue 2 nights ago." He looked up. "Is that accurate, Mr. Strickland?" Axel gave a small shrug, chains clinking softly. "You tell me. You're the one reading the list." Caprio didn't blink. "You have the right to remain silent, but if you choose to speak, I recommend respect over sarcasm." Axel leaned forward, forearms resting on the podium. "Respect's earned. I don't hand it out like candy." "Noted," Caprio replied. "And yet this courtroom doesn't run on what you choose to hand out. It runs on the law." Something like a smile tugged at the corner of Axel's mouth. Not amusement, more like a snarl that found manners funny. "I've sat in rooms like this before, Judge. Different cities, different faces, same setup. You talk, I listen. You feel powerful. I feel nothing." Caprio folded his hands on the bench. "Justice isn't about feelings. It's about facts." Axel's eyebrows went up. "You really believe that?" "Every morning." Axel looked around slowly, taking in the rows of benches, the flags, the seal behind the judge's chair. "This whole thing feels like a stage," he muttered.
Caprio nodded once. "Sometimes it is, but not the kind you think. This is where truth performs and consequences follow." Axel let out a dry laugh, low and rumbling. "Well then, let the show begin." Behind him, someone in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. An older man in the second row whispered something to his wife. She shushed him quickly. The tension in the room was thick enough to taste. Even the clerk who had been shuffling papers had stopped entirely, hands frozen mid-motion like she was watching a bomb being defused. Caprio didn't react. He just turned the first page and read aloud, voice calm as winter. Police reports indicate the defendant was involved in a physical altercation at approximately 11:13 p.m. at Eddie's bar. Witnesses state he struck a patron in the face with a pool cue, broke 2 bar stools during the incident, and threatened the bartender with a broken glass before being subdued by law enforcement. He paused. "Do you deny any of that?" Axel's tongue clicked once behind his teeth. "I don't deny a damn thing. God disrespected me. You don't do that in front of my brothers." "Your brothers being the motorcycle club?" Axel nodded. "Death's Choir. You've heard of us." Caprio didn't look up. "I've heard of many things, Mr. Strickland. What matters is what I read in front of me." He turned another page. "There's also a file here from the Rhode Island State Police. Says that in the last 6 years, you've been arrested 5 times. Assault, illegal weapons possession, public intimidation, and inciting a riot at a funeral." Axel smiled, lips tight over yellowed teeth. "That one got dismissed." "Doesn't erase the pattern," Caprio replied. Axel's voice shifted. "Look, you read reports. I lived those nights. Big difference. Men like me, we come from fire. That's what built us, not handbooks or courtroom etiquette." Caprio's pen hovered above his notepad. He looked at the defendant carefully. "Tell me something. Have you ever thought that maybe the fire you're so proud of didn't forge you? That maybe it just burned everything else away? Reason, decency, even mercy?" Axel didn't answer right away. His jaw moved side to side, chewing on the silence. "Ever get jumped in a parking lot just because you wear the wrong cut? Ever have a bottle smashed on your back because someone didn't like your ink?" Caprio leaned back in his chair. "I've watched young men cry in my courtroom because nobody ever gave them a chance. I've watched mothers beg for leniency because their son got caught up with the wrong crowd. And I've watched grown men throw away every chance they've ever been given." He let the weight of his words settle. "You're not the first to sit in that chair thinking the world is stacked against you." Axel squinted. "So, this your sermon part?" "No," Caprio said. "This is the part where you get to decide whether to keep living by a code that's already failed you or not." Axel chuckled bitterly. "I live by my own rules. And yet here you are, shackled before a judge." The courtroom went silent again. A few feet away, the prosecutor looked up from her files. Even the bailiff stopped writing. Axel broke eye contact for the first time, staring down at the scratched wood of the podium. Caprio said, "Tell me about the man you hit. Why him?" "He bumped me, didn't apologize, looked at my patch like it meant nothing." "So you fractured his nose?" "He disrespected me." "No, Mr. Strickland. He walked past you. That's not disrespect. That's living. You just couldn't tolerate being ignored." Axel's hands gripped the podium edge. For a second, it looked like he might flip it. A muscle in his neck twitched. The deputies on either side of him tensed, hands moving subtly toward their belts. But Axel just breathed, heavy and controlled, like a bull deciding whether to charge. Then his grip loosened. "You ever feel invisible, Judge?" Axel asked suddenly, his voice quieter than before. "Like you could walk into a room and people look right through you? Or worse, they see you and decide you're not worth their time before you even open your mouth?"
Caprio studied him carefully. "Yes," he said simply, "I have." That answer clearly wasn't what Axel expected. His eyebrows rose slightly. "You know me," Caprio said, "when I was younger. Different circumstances, same feeling." "Then you did it," Axel said, almost pleading. "Now you get why." "I get it," Caprio interrupted, "but I didn't break anyone's face over it." The moment hung between them like a wire pulled tight. Caprio turned another page. "Do you believe the law has ever been fair to you?" Axel's mouth moved, then stopped. The pause stretched out. Caprio set the file down. "I'll take that silence as an answer." The quiet was almost more intense than any shouting had been. Axel Strickland wasn't used to being outvoiced. He thrived in volume. Bar fights, street rallies, garage disputes, places where whoever shouted louder won. But in this room, Judge Caprio didn't raise his voice once. And yet the man who thought himself a storm now stood in its eye, motionless. Caprio's hand tapped gently against the bench. "Let's talk about the morning after." Axel blinked. "What?" "After your arrest. After the adrenaline fades and your brothers go home. When the cell door closes. When there's nothing left but your own voice in your head. Do you ever feel anything?" Axel grunted. "I feel fine." "Not guilt," Caprio said. "Not shame. Just anything." Axel's shoulders rose and fell. "Only feeling I got is tired. Tired of being judged by people in robes who've never spent a day where I've lived." "Then show me that world," Caprio said. Axel looked up. "You want a story? Fine. My first assault charge, I was 16. My stepdad came at me with a belt. I broke his collarbone with a lamp. Guess who the cops arrested?" Caprio listened. "Second time was my best friend getting jumped by a guy twice our size. I stepped in, punched the guy's teeth out. They called it battery. Didn't care that my friend had a broken rib." He shrugged. "Every fight, every charge, every incident you've got in that folder, there's a reason. But the system doesn't ask why. It just numbers you." Caprio nodded slowly. "So now you wear that history like armor." "Damn right I do, because I got tired of people pretending the rules were made for me. They weren't. They were made to keep people like me in line." Caprio leaned forward slightly. "What if I told you I agree, that this system hasn't always been fair?" Axel paused. "I'd say that's the first true thing I've heard today." Something flickered between them. Not understanding exactly, not respect, but the faintest trace of recognition. Maybe that's why the next moment hit so hard. Caprio turned a page. "I also see here that when officers tried to restrain you, you headbutted one of them and attempted to bite another." Axel sneered. "He tried to pin me down. I don't like being touched." Caprio nodded. "Which brings us to now. You don't trust this system. You don't trust the law. You think all of this, the flags, the robes, the oaths, is theater." "Because it is," Axel snapped. "People like me don't win here. We just get processed." Caprio stood. It was subtle. No slamming of the gavel, no outburst, just the quiet rise of a man who'd heard enough. "Mr. Strickland, this courtroom has seen grieving mothers, war veterans, teenage addicts, and kids orphaned by gang violence. And not one of them, not one, ever told me they were bigger than the law." Axel's fists clenched. "I'm not here to win," Caprio said. "I'm here to listen. But that listening stops the moment you believe you're untouchable." Axel's nostrils flared. "Maybe I am." "Stare. Then show me." It wasn't a challenge. It was an invitation. And for the first time, Axel didn't know how to answer. He looked around again, not for an escape, not for backup, but for grounding. He found none. The courtroom that had watched him swagger in like a storm cloud now watched something quieter unravel. His story was no longer holding the weight of his rage.
And somewhere deep down, Axel Strickland knew it. The silence broke like glass. Axel's face twitched. That kind of twitch that comes before violence. The kind officers recognize too late. The courtroom knew something was coming before even Caprio did.
"You want to see untouchable?" Axel said, eyes narrow. "Watch this." Then it happened. Fast, raw, and ugly. Axel lunged forward. The chain at his ankle didn't stop him. Neither did the shocked gasp from his own lawyer, who reached up too late. With both hands, Axel shoved the defendant's table aside, metal legs scraping against tile like a blade. A deputy reached for him but missed. And just like that, Axel Strickland was on the bench. He grabbed Judge Caprio by the collar. For one impossible second, the courtroom froze. Then came the crack. A right hook, short and dirty, landed on Caprio's cheekbone. Not a full punch, but enough to snap the judge's head back an inch. Chaos. Two deputies tackled Axel from behind, one wrestling his arms, the other trying to peel him off the bench. A woman screamed from the gallery. A man stood up, shielding his child's eyes. Phones came out, recording, buzzing, documenting. Axel roared as they brought him to the floor, his voice cracking with rage and spit. "You're all fakes, all of you. I ain't afraid of your rules." The mother in the gallery pulled her son close, covering his eyes, but the boy twisted to keep watching. One of the reporters dropped her phone. It clattered against the wooden bench, still recording, the camera angle now showing nothing but the ceiling and the old chandelier that hadn't been dusted in months. Someone near the back gasped, "Oh my God!" Another voice, older and shakier, said, "Call security." But security was already there, already struggling. It took 3 men total to finally pin Axel completely, his chest heaving against the floor, spittle and blood mixing on the marble. One deputy had a torn shirt. Another was breathing hard, face red from exertion. For a moment, the only sound was the collective breathing of everyone in the room, like they'd all just run a marathon. Caprio, seated again with a hand to his face, didn't move. Not at first. Not until Axel was pinned face down, cuffed, blood trailing from his lip onto the polished floor. Then, and only then, did Judge Caprio speak. "Let him up," he said, quietly. A deputy blinked. "Sir?" "Let him up." The room held its breath. Axel groaned as the deputies loosened their grip. He slumped against the base of the bench, eyes wild, chest heaving. For the first time, he looked less like a monster and more like a man who'd been cornered for years. Caprio reached for a tissue from his desk drawer, dabbing the thin line of blood at the corner of his mouth. The room expected fury or wrath or a lecture. They got none of it. Just silence. 5 seconds. 10. 15. No one moved. No one spoke. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Someone's breath caught audibly in the back row. The heating system ticked through the walls. A pen rolled off the clerk's desk and hit the floor with a tiny plastic bounce that sounded like thunder. Axel's eyes darted from face to face, searching for the retaliation he knew was coming. It didn't come. Caprio stood, this time with the full weight of the court behind his eyes. "You assaulted a judge in a courtroom of law," he said, voice even. Axel smirked, still panting. "Yeah, I did." Caprio didn't look at the deputies, didn't raise his gavel. He looked at Axel, straight into him. "And I'm still not dismissing your case." A murmur rippled through the court. Axel squinted. "What?" "You want me to retaliate?" Caprio said. "You want me to make this personal. Because if I do, then your story stays intact. The story where everyone's out to get you and you've never had a fair shot." Caprio leaned closer, not angry, but deeply, profoundly tired. "I won't give you that satisfaction." Axel didn't reply. He couldn't. His mouth was open, but there were no words left inside it. This court stands not because of force, but because of what we refuse to become. The line landed soft but absolute, like snow settling on stone. Axel sat frozen. The courtroom held its breath, and in that moment, something colder than chains wrapped around him. A justice that didn't flinch. Caprio sat back down slowly, his body stiff from the earlier attack, though his face betrayed no pain, only a kind of weathered calm. He picked up the file folder again. It was slightly bent from the scuffle, papers askew. Still, he smoothed it out carefully, methodically, like someone handling something sacred. "You're going to sit in that chair," Caprio said, "and you're going to listen, because today justice will be delivered not with a fist, but with the truth." A medic approached the bench. Caprio waved him off with a polite shake of his head. "Later," he said. "Justice first." He opened the folder. "This isn't your first time here. You've had charges in New York, Pittsburgh, Chicago. Bar fights, vandalism, threats." Axel tilted his head slightly, more reflex than reply. "But what stands out isn't the violence," he continued. "It's the repetition, the steady, deliberate collapse of everything around you. Friendships, jobs, marriages, all frayed to the same end." Axel muttered something. Caprio paused. "Speak up." "I don't trust people. They don't trust me. Keeps things simple." Caprio nodded slowly, not in agreement, but in understanding. "And what about this court? You think we're all against you too?" Axel shrugged. "You wear the robe." "I wear the robe," Caprio echoed. "But what does that mean to you?" Silence. The judge leaned forward. "I'll tell you what it means. It means I've seen fathers cry after being ticketed because it meant groceries wouldn't be bought that week. It means I've watched teenagers lie to protect friends who didn't care enough to stay. It means I've sat here day after day hearing every excuse and still trying to find the thread of truth in all of it." His voice grew firmer. "And it means that today, after being assaulted, I still refuse to hand you over to a system you claim to hate, not out of pity, Mr. Strickland, but because I won't let your rage rewrite the rules." Axel blinked. It wasn't the words that got him. It was the calm, the unshakable, grounded gravity of a man who'd been yelled at, cursed at, even hit, and still chose grace over power. "You think you live by your own code?" Caprio said, "but real codes don't leave trails of broken people behind." Axel clenched his jaw. "I did what I had to do." "No," Caprio replied. "You did what you wanted to do. There's a difference." A long pause stretched out. "You see that child in the gallery?" Caprio asked. Everyone turned. A boy, maybe 10, sat next to his mother, both of them frozen since the attack. The mother still had one hand on his chest, like she was shielding him from what he'd already seen. Caprio looked back to Axel. "He watched you try to hurt someone because you didn't like the rules." He stepped down from the bench and walked to the podium, close but not too close. "But he also saw what came next, that when you struck, we didn't strike back, that when you tried to destroy order, it didn't respond with chaos." His voice dropped. "He'll remember that longer than your punch." Axel's shoulders sagged slightly. Caprio turned and walked back to the bench. He tapped the next page with the edge of his pen. "Let's talk about March 14th. That was the day you were evicted from your apartment on Pleasant Street. Landlord filed notice after months of complaints, noise, damage, threats. Police reports indicate neighbors had called 911 6 times in 10 weeks.
Axel scratched the side of his face. "Wasn't my noise. But you lived there."
Caprio said. A beat. I live there, Axel muttered. With someone else. Axel nodded. My girl, Jen. And where is she now? No reply. Mr. Strickland. Axel's jaw tightened. His fingers fidgeted along the edge of the table. She left. Got tired of the drama. Caprio read from the page. Says here she filed for a restraining order 2 days after the eviction. Of course she did. Axel rolled his eyes. Of course. Caprio raised an eyebrow. She said I scared her, Axel said, voice rising. But I never laid a hand on her. I punched walls, not her. I shouted, yeah, but I never hurt her. The judge let the word sit for a moment. You know, sometimes pain doesn't need bruises. Axel blinked. I'm not excusing it, Caprio continued. I'm saying that in this room, truth matters. And the truth is that anger, even when it doesn't land, can still drive people away. She knew what she was getting into, Axel muttered, but his voice had lost its edge. Did she? Caprio asked. Or did she see someone she thought she could save and realize too late that you didn't want saving? Axel's jaw worked side to side. His eyes went somewhere distant, like he was watching a scene play out that only he could see. She used to make me breakfast, he said quietly, almost to himself. Eggs, bacon, the whole thing. Even when I came home at 3 a.m, smelling like a bar fight. She'd be there in the morning with a plate and coffee. Never said a word about it. Until she did. What did she say? Axel looked up, and for the first time there was something raw in his eyes, something unguarded. She said I was killing the man she fell in love with, that he was still in there somewhere, but I wouldn't let him out. His voice cracked, just barely. She said watching me was like watching someone drown on purpose. Caprio closed the file. His hand rested on top of it like a seal. You told me earlier that you don't trust people. I understand. Trust, once shattered, doesn't glue back easily. But what I see, Mr. Strickland, is a man haunted by betrayal. Not just by others, but by himself. Axel's mouth opened, but no words came. You're not afraid of courts. You're afraid of being seen. You think you know me? No. I think I see parts of you you've spent your whole life hiding. He paused. Like that letter in your pocket. Axel froze. His right hand instinctively moved to his jacket, the only piece of his outfit not searched after the earlier chaos. How'd you know? Caprio gave a faint smile. I've been watching defendants for 30 years. You touched it 3 times since you sat down. Axel hesitated. Then, reluctantly, he reached into his coat and pulled it out. A wrinkled, yellowing envelope, folded and refolded, the kind of thing you don't carry for function, but for weight. Who's it from? Caprio asked gently. Axel hesitated. My mom. Caprio nodded. May I? Axel looked down at the letter. Then slowly, he extended it. A bailiff took it and handed it to the judge. Caprio unfolded it carefully, like it might dissolve in his hands. He read silently. Then he spoke. She says, Axel, I know the world's made you cold, But you weren't born that way. I remember you at 5, afraid to step on worms after the rain." Axel looked away. Caprio continued, "I know you're angry, but son, if you let that anger keep speaking for you, soon no one will remember your real voice." Caprio folded the letter back up. "She wrote this 2 years ago, and you've kept it." Axel didn't respond. "Why?" Axel's voice was barely audible. "Because no one else talks to me like that." Caprio returned the letter. "Maybe that's the problem." Axel held the paper like it might vanish. In the gallery, nobody moved. For the first time in the entire proceeding, the courtroom wasn't reacting to Axel Strickland's violence, but to his humanity. Caprio took a breath. "And now we have to decide what happens next." He tapped his pen once, then set it down with finality. "Mr. Strickland, your actions today could have ended this hearing. The moment you raised your hand, everyone knew what could have happened, what should have happened under the law. Assaulting a judge is not something you walk away from." Axel nodded once, like he'd already accepted that fate, maybe even welcomed it. "But I'm not going to do that." Gasps, audible, unmistakable. Even Axel looked up, eyebrows twitching, not in defiance, but in confusion. "I'm not going to do that because I believe justice has a higher obligation than punishment. It must also be honest." He stood again, not in anger, but authority. "And the honest truth is this. What I saw today was a man who hasn't been given many reasons to believe in mercy, who's been thrown around by systems, discarded by people, and hardened into someone he wasn't meant to be." He paused. "But here's where the honesty cuts both ways, Mr. Strickland. You are not innocent, you are not a victim, and you are not beyond consequence." Axel sat up straighter. "You assaulted me," Caprio said. "You disrupted a courtroom. You've endangered people with your past actions, and you carry wounds you refuse to treat. But you also, even if for 1 second, showed that there might be a part of you still capable of listening." He turned to the clerk. "For the charges of assault, property damage, and repeated violations of the court's code of conduct, this court sentences you to the following: 12 months probation under strict weekly behavioral therapy, 180 hours of community service to be served at the Providence Veterans Home, and a mandatory letter of apology to be written, not to me, but to the boy in the gallery, the one who saw all of this." All eyes turned to the child again, who sat wide-eyed, his mother holding his shoulder. Caprio looked back at Axel. "I'm not letting you off easy. I'm giving you work to do." Axel exhaled sharply, not quite disbelief, but something adjacent to it. "You don't want an apology?" he asked. Caprio smiled faintly. "I don't need one." Then louder, "Because this court is not about me." He leaned forward slightly. "But I want you to understand something, Mr. Strickland. That boy is going to go home tonight, and his mother is going to have to explain what he saw. She is going to have to explain why a grown man attacked a judge, why people sometimes choose violence. And years from now, when he thinks about the justice system, this moment will be part of his understanding of it." Caprio's voice grew quieter, but somehow more powerful. "You don't owe me anything, but you owe him the truth about what happens next. Whether you take this chance or throw it away, that's what your letter will be about. Not your excuses, not your justifications, just what you chose to do when someone finally believed you could be better." The courtroom was so silent you could hear the old heating system tick through the walls. He tapped the gavel once, not a slam, just a clean, final sound. "Sentence rendered." For a moment after the gavel echoed, nobody moved. Not the attorneys, not the clerks, not even Axel Strickland. The tension that had gripped the room like a steel fist now released, not with noise, but with quiet, a kind of reverence you usually see in churches, not courthouses. Then slowly people began to breathe again. The courtroom gallery wasn't packed, but those who'd witnessed it, the mother and son, a few reporters in the back, an elderly woman knitting in the third row, all sat watching Judge Caprio with a kind of stunned stillness. The boy in the gallery leaned forward. His mother whispered something into his ear, but he kept his eyes on Axel. Axel noticed. He looked away.
The boy didn't. The court officer broke the silence first, voice low and calm. Please remain seated as we proceed with the docket. Judge Caprio sat down slowly, his body stiff from the earlier attack, though his face betrayed no pain, only a kind of weathered calm. He opened the next file as if it were any other day, but the air had changed. Axel's lawyer approached him cautiously, unsure whether to whisper, nod, or offer a pat on the shoulder. He did none of those things, just stood beside him, waiting. Axel finally asked under his breath, "That kid, who is he?" The lawyer shrugged. "Just here with his mom for a parking ticket, I think." Axel looked at him again. "Really?" This time the kid didn't smile, didn't flinch, just stared back like someone seeing the truth of a thing for the first time. Axel lowered his head. Across the room the reporters began typing again. A few raised their phones discreetly, capturing Caprio as he turned the next page in the docket. Business as usual. But the real headline had already been written, not in ink, but in example. Caprio caught one of the reporter's eyes, didn't scold, didn't smile, just held the gaze long enough to make the moment real, then returned to his paperwork. The prosecutor, Lisa Brainer, stood to approach the bench for the next case. As she passed Caprio, she leaned in just enough to say, "That was something, Your Honor." Caprio didn't look up. It was justice. She nodded once. No more words. The bailiff, who'd stood frozen during the scuffle earlier, clearly shaken then, now resumed his post beside the courtroom door. As Axel was instructed to remain seated for further paperwork, the bailiff approached and gently placed a hand on the back of the bench behind him. Not hostile, not aggressive, just present, like someone who'd remembered what this room was supposed to stand for. A few feet away, the elderly woman in the third row resumed knitting, the soft click-click of her needles oddly comforting. She didn't look up, but her smile had shifted, something quiet and knowing. Meanwhile, outside the courthouse, early reports had already begun trickling onto local news feeds, but none of those headlines would capture the weight of what really unfolded. Not the restraint, not the mercy, not the unexpected reminder that sometimes the greatest power lies in refusing to use it. Inside, Caprio moved on. Names were called, charges were read, the rhythm of the court returned. But in the minds of those who'd sat through it, this day, this moment, would echo for a long time. Axel Strickland didn't move right away. His body remained slumped in the defendant's chair, shoulders slack, eyes fixed on the now blank space in front of the judge's bench. His hands fidgeted at the frayed edge of his denim vest, the same one that had taken the brunt of his fall after the bailiffs pulled him back. The scabs on his knuckles had begun to crust over. His breathing was shallow, not panicked, just deflated. A court officer approached and spoke quietly. "You're free to go for today. Probation office is down the hall. You'll be escorted." Axel didn't answer, just nodded once. As he stood, the leather creaked across his broad shoulders. The courtroom had mostly cleared now, just a handful of observers lingering, still stunned from what they'd witnessed. The little boy was gone,
but his seat near the gallery rail still held the paper airplane he'd folded from his mother's citation printout. It sat on the wooden bench, nose bent, wings uneven. Axel stared at it. The bailiff beside him followed his gaze. "You good?" Axel grunted. Never been good. The bailiff didn't push. Then be different. It wasn't a command, more like a tired suggestion from someone who'd seen too many men walk out the same door and never come back the same way twice. Axel walked slowly, not hunched, not dragging, but slower than when he came in, like the floor felt heavier beneath him. Out in the hallway, fluorescent lights flickered above beige walls. The echo of his boots was the only sound until the officer opened the door to the probation office. "Someone will talk to you about the therapy program. You'll have to show up regularly." Axel paused at the threshold. His hand still clutched the folded letter from his mother, now wrinkled even further, edges stained faintly from the sweat of his palm.
He didn't ask questions, didn't fight. He just went in. As the door clicked shut behind him, Judge Caprio remained seated inside the courtroom, reviewing the next file. But for a brief moment, he looked up toward the side exit where Axel had passed. No emotion crossed his face, just the stillness of a man who knew he'd chosen the harder path and would choose it again. The prosecutor stood nearby with a fresh docket folder. Caprio didn't break eye contact with the door. "Do you think he'll change?" she asked quietly. Caprio set the folder down. "I think we just gave him a crack of light." She considered that. "You think he'll step into it?" Caprio finally looked at her. "That's not my job. I just opened the door." He picked up the next file and motioned to the bailiff. "Call the next case." The courtroom moved forward, one case at a time, like it always did. But outside, as Axel sat in a cracked vinyl chair, filling out the first form of his mandated program, he looked up for a moment at a crooked painting on the wall, a faded print of a mountain sunrise. He didn't smile, didn't sigh, but he stared at it for a long while, long enough to wonder what it would feel like to see something like that in person. Then, quietly, he wrote his name on the line marked participant, and for a man who never believed in courts or mercy or the good in people, that was something. 3 weeks later, the paper airplane still sat on Deputy Rizzo's desk. He'd found it after the hearing, picked it up on a whim, smoothed out the creases. The citation number was barely visible beneath the folds. He'd meant to throw it away a dozen times. Never did. On the 32nd day, a Tuesday, Axel Strickland walked into the courthouse again. No chains this time, no sneer. Just a man in a flannel short, sleeves rolled to the elbows, holding a folded piece of paper in one hand and a small potted succulent in the other. He'd written the letter. Deputy Rizzo watched him from across the lobby. Axel's gait was different now. Not softer, exactly, but less like a man bracing for a fight. More like someone who'd realized he didn't have to throw the first punch anymore. "You here for check-in?" Rizzo asked. Axel nodded. "And to drop something off." He held up the letter. It was handwritten, careful and deliberate, in block letters that looked like they'd taken hours. The envelope was addressed simply, "To the boy in the gallery." Rizzo took it carefully. "I'll make sure it gets to him." Axel shifted his weight. "The plant's for the judge, if you'll take it." Rizzo raised an eyebrow. "A cactus?" "Succulent," Axel corrected. "Doesn't need much, just water once in a while and a little sun. Figured that was about right." Rizzo smiled faintly. "I'll pass it along." Axel nodded, turned to leave, then stopped. "Is he in today?" "Judge Caprio?" "Yeah, courtroom 3. Axel hesitated, then shook his head.
"Nah, I'm good." But as he walked toward the exit, he glanced back once at the courtroom doors. Through the small window, he could just make out the back of the judge's head, the familiar posture, the calm authority. Axel didn't go in, but he didn't look away either. That evening, Judge Caprio found the succulent on his desk with a small note tucked beneath the pot. It read, "Still working on it. Thank you for the door." No signature. Didn't need one. Caprio set the plant on the corner of his desk where the morning light would hit it. He didn't say anything to anyone about it, just watered it once, adjusted the pot slightly, and returned to his files. But that night when he told his wife about his day over dinner, he mentioned a man who had come back, not because he had to, but because he'd started to believe he could. She asked if he thought the man would make it. Caprio set down his fork and thought for a moment. "I think he's trying, and sometimes that's the bravest thing a person can do." 6 months later, Axel Strickland completed his community service hours at the Providence Veterans Home. The coordinator there, a woman named Gloria, who'd seen every kind of volunteer walk through those doors, wrote a letter to the court. In it, she mentioned that Axel had started coming in on days he wasn't scheduled, that he'd sit with the older vets, the ones nobody visited anymore, and just listen. That one of them, a Korean War veteran named Earl, had started calling him son.
The boy from the gallery, whose name was Michael, kept the letter Axel had written. His mother framed it and hung it in his room, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. A reminder that people could choose differently, that anger didn't have to be the loudest voice in the room, that sometimes the strongest thing you could do was stop fighting and start listening. Michael would grow up to study social work. Years later, in his college application essay, he'd write about the day he watched a man attack a judge and how that same judge chose mercy over punishment. He'd write about how that single decision taught him more about justice than any textbook ever could. And somewhere in Providence, on a quiet street where the autumn leaves gathered in rust-colored piles, Axel Strickland walked into a small apartment. Not the one on Pleasant Street, a new one, smaller, cleaner, with windows that actually let in light. He set his keys on the counter, made himself coffee, and sat down at a second-hand table. On it was a notebook, half filled with entries from his therapy sessions. Beside it, a photo of his mother, smiling in a way he'd almost forgotten she could. He opened the notebook and wrote, "Day 180. Still here. Still trying." It wasn't poetry. It wasn't redemption. It was just a man, one day at a time, learning that the fire that had defined him didn't have to consume him. That the strongest code wasn't about who you could break, but who you could become when you finally stopped breaking yourself. Judge Caprio never saw Axel again after that day in court. But every morning, when the light hit that succulent on his desk, he remembered that justice wasn't just about punishment or mercy. It was about offering people a door and trusting that somewhere, somehow, they'd find the courage to walk through it. Because codes that don't protect the weak, that don't leave room for second chances, that don't recognize the humanity in even the most hardened heart, those aren't codes worth following. They're just chains dressed up as principles. And in that Providence courtroom, on a Wednesday morning, when a man lunged and the world held its breath, Judge Frank Caprio proved that the strongest response to violence isn't more violence. It's the quiet, unshakable refusal to become what you're fighting against. That's the story. That's what happened when a biker attacked Judge Caprio in court. Not revenge, not rage, just a man in a robe who understood that justice, real justice, isn't about breaking people down. It's about giving them a reason to build themselves back up. If this story moved you, if it made you think about mercy and accountability differently, do us a favor. Drop a comment about where you're watching from, what this story meant to you, or share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to Order in the Court so you never miss these moments that remind us all what justice really looks like. Because tomorrow we'll be back with another case, another decision, another reminder that the most powerful person in the room is often the one who chooses compassion over condemnation. See you then. Dramatization for storytelling and education, not legal advice or reporting.